Some people believed museums preserved history. Others believed they preserved truth. But hidden beneath one of the oldest cities in the country was a museum that preserved something far more disturbing. It displayed crimes 24 hours before they happened. No newspaper had ever written about it. No map had ever marked its location. No survivor had ever managed to prove it existed. Because everyone who discovered it faced the same impossible choice: ignore what they had seen, or try to stop the future. Neither choice ended well. This is the story of the museum that never collected the past. It collected tomorrow. Rain washed over the city in endless silver sheets. Traffic lights reflected across flooded streets like pools of blood. Detective Ethan Cole sat alone inside an aging police station, staring at a wall covered in photographs from unsolved homicide cases. For nearly 12 years, he had investigated murders that refused to make sense. Victims with no enemies. Locked rooms with no exits. Evidence appearing before witnesses remembered seeing it. Every unanswered question became another weight pressing against his mind. His coworkers joked that Ethan didn't solve cases anymore. He collected them. Tonight was supposed to be his final shift. The resignation letter rested inside his desk drawer and signed. He kept looking at it without touching it. Leaving should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like surrender. A knock interrupted the silence. Officer Lena Morris stepped inside carrying an old evidence box. "Ethan, this arrived an hour ago." "No return address?" She shook her head. "Someone left it at reception." The cardboard looked decades old. Dust covered every corner. Across the lid, only 4 words had been handwritten. "Open after midnight." Ethan frowned. "No fingerprints?" "None." "No security footage?" The cameras glitched. Again. That word had become disturbingly common lately. Glitched. As though reality itself occasionally forgot how to function. Lena forced a smile. Probably another prank. Ethan wasn't convinced. People usually signed their pranks. This felt deliberate. Personal. He placed the box beneath his desk without opening it. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. Midnight arrived with unnatural silence. The city's power flickered once. Twice. Then stabilized. At that exact moment, the phone rang. Not Ethan's cell phone. Not the station's emergency line. An old rotary telephone sitting in the evidence archive. A phone disconnected almost 30 years earlier. Lena stared toward the hallway. "Did you hear that?" Ethan nodded. Neither of them moved. The ringing continued. Slow. Patient. As though whoever was calling knew they had all night. Finally Ethan walked toward the archive. The dusty room smelled of old paper and damp concrete. The rotary phone rested on a forgotten wooden desk. Still ringing. He lifted the receiver. Static. Then. A whisper. "You're already too late." The line went dead. At the exact same moment. Every light inside the station shut off. Darkness swallowed the building. Only emergency exit signs remained glowing red. When electricity returned seconds later, the evidence box beneath Ethan's desk had disappeared. Security cameras showed nothing. One frame contained the box. The next frame. It simply wasn't there. As though someone had erased it from existence. Lena searched every room. Nothing. Ethan stood silently. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous. Familiar. Like remembering a nightmare he'd forgotten years ago. Then. He noticed muddy footprints leading away from the archive. Only one set. Bare feet. They ended at a locked maintenance door leading beneath the station. The lock had rusted shut decades earlier. Tonight, it stood open. Cold air drifted upward carrying a strange smell. Old wood. Dust. Fresh paint. Ethan grabbed a flashlight. Lena reached for her radio. No signal. Of course. Neither spoke as they descended narrow concrete stairs disappearing beneath the city. Every step echoed unnaturally long. Eventually, the staircase ended. Ahead stood enormous iron doors. Neither belonged beneath a police station. Above them hung a faded sign. The Museum of Recorded Truth. The letters had almost vanished beneath age. Lena whispered. This place isn't on any blueprint. Ethan slowly pushed open the doors. They didn't creak. They welcomed. The museum was immaculate. No dust. No decay. Soft lights illuminated polished wooden floors. Classical music drifted quietly through empty halls. Paintings covered the walls. None showed landscapes. Every painting depicted terrified expressions, frozen moments before death. Below each portrait, no names. Only dates. Future dates. Lena laughed nervously. Some kind of art installation. Ethan wasn't listening. He noticed a plaque beside the entrance. New exhibition opens every midnight. Further ahead, a large room stood waiting. Its title read, Exhibit 347. Inside, everything looked painfully real. A tiny apartment. Broken coffee mug. Dining table overturned. Blood covering one wall. A body lying face down. Every object had been carefully preserved. Even the smell of copper lingered in the air. Lena covered her mouth. It isn't fake. Ethan approached carefully. The victim's face remained hidden. Beside the body rested today's newspaper. Tomorrow's date had been circled in red ink. Then Ethan noticed another detail. The victim's wristwatch. Still ticking. Impossible. He leaned closer. The second hand matched his own watch. Exactly. Tick. 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 Every second synchronized. Lena whispered. How could they? She stopped speaking. The victim slowly rolled onto its back. Not moving. Simply changing position. Like a mannequin settling under invisible hands. Its eyes remained open. Frozen forever in absolute terror. Ethan felt his heartbeat stop. He recognized the face. It belonged to Daniel Brooks. A schoolteacher reported missing only 2 hours earlier. Except, Daniel wasn't dead. Not yet. As Ethan stared at the impossible exhibit, a soft voice echoed through the empty gallery. It came from somewhere behind him. Calm. Almost welcoming. Please don't touch the exhibits. They haven't happened yet. The voice lingered in the gallery long after it had spoken. Ethan and Lena turned at the same time. An elderly man stood at the far end of the hall, perfectly still. He wore a charcoal gray suit that looked decades out of fashion, white gloves without a speck of dust, and a porcelain mask with no expression. The mask was smooth except for 2 narrow eye openings, behind which only darkness could be seen. In one hand, he held a feather duster. In the other, an antique pocket watch. He looked less like a monster. And more like a museum employee beginning another ordinary workday. I asked, he said politely, that you don't touch the exhibits. Lena instinctively reached for her sidearm. Police. Remove the mask and identify yourself. The man ignored the command. Instead, he brushed an invisible speck of dust from the display case beside him. The museum has very strict rules. Ethan stepped forward. Who are you? The masked man tilted his head slightly. I am only the curator. Who built this place? I inherited it. What is this museum? The curator's answer came without hesitation. It is where tomorrow becomes impossible to ignore. Silence followed. The answer explained nothing. Yet somehow, it felt complete. The curator walked toward Exhibit 347 without making a sound. He stopped beside Daniel Brooks' motionless body. Tomorrow, he said softly, at 8:17 p.m., Daniel Brooks will die in his apartment. Lena shook her head. No. We'll arrest you before that happens. The curator looked genuinely puzzled. For what crime? You admitted knowing about it. I know about rain before it falls. That doesn't make me responsible for the storm. Ethan watched him carefully. The curator never sounded defensive. He sounded certain. You expect us to believe this is a prediction? Ethan asked. The curator slowly nodded. No. I expect you to try to stop it. Those words settled heavily over the room. Everyone does. By sunrise, the museum had vanished. The iron doors beneath the station opened only to a blank concrete wall. No hallway. No gallery. No paintings. Nothing. Lena replayed the night's events over and over in her mind. It doesn't make sense. Ethan answered quietly. It doesn't have to. Using the missing person report, they located Daniel Brooks alive and well. He lived alone in a quiet apartment overlooking the river. When Ethan knocked, Daniel answered with tired eyes and a forced smile. Detective? You need to come with us. Daniel frowned. Why? We believe your life is in danger. Daniel laughed awkwardly. I teach 8th grade history. My biggest threat is grading exams. He invited them inside. Everything looked identical. The blue coffee mug. The wooden dining table. The bookshelf. The old wall clock. Every object matched the museum exhibit perfectly. Ethan's pulse quickened. Even the framed family photograph stood in exactly the same place. The only difference: Daniel was still alive. Ethan decided to disrupt every detail shown in the exhibit. He moved the furniture. He removed every knife from the kitchen. He unplugged the wall clock. He even broke the blue coffee mug himself. If the future depends on these details, he said, we change the details. Daniel watched in confusion. You detectives always redecorate crime scenes before they happen? No one laughed. By evening, Ethan placed 2 patrol officers outside the apartment. Lena remained inside. Daniel agreed to stay awake until morning. At exactly 8:16 p.m. Nothing happened. Lena smiled. We did it. Ethan looked at his watch. 1 minute passed. Then another. Relief slowly settled across the room. Perhaps fate could be changed. Then the apartment building shook violently. A delivery truck crashed through the ground floor entrance after its driver suffered a sudden heart attack. The impact severed the building's main gas line. Within seconds, an explosion ripped through the lower floors. The blast hurled furniture across Daniel's apartment. Glass shattered. The ceiling collapsed. Daniel was thrown backward as a heavy wooden beam crushed his chest. The broken coffee mug Ethan had smashed earlier slid across the floor, stopping exactly where it had rested in the museum exhibit. Blood splattered across the same wall. The dining table overturned into the exact same position. The room became the exhibit. Daniel died at 8:17 p.m. Exactly as predicted. Not because the future stayed the same. Because it had changed. To arrive at the same destination. Hours later, investigators declared the explosion a tragic accident. No evidence of foul play. No murderer. No suspect. Yet Ethan couldn't stop thinking about one impossible detail. The museum had called it a crime scene. Not an accident. Someone. Or something. Had wanted Daniel dead. Unable to let go, Ethan returned alone to the maintenance corridor beneath the station. This time, the iron doors were waiting. Open. Inside, classical music echoed softly once again. Exhibit 347 had disappeared. In its place stood a fresh display. The plaque now read, Exhibit 348. Ethan froze. The recreated room looked painfully familiar. His apartment. His bookshelf. His desk. His framed photograph of his late wife. Every detail was perfect. At the center of the room, a man's body lay face down on the living room floor. Ethan stepped closer. The victim wore his coat. His watch. His wedding ring. The face wasn't visible. His hands trembled. He didn't want to turn the body over. But he had to know. Slowly. He reached out. Before his fingers touched the shoulder, the curator's voice echoed from somewhere behind him. You've made the same mistake everyone makes. Ethan turned sharply. What mistake? The curator answered with unsettling calm. They all believe the victim is the story. He paused. The victim is only the invitation. The curator raised his pocket watch. It clicked open. Inside was not a clock, but a tiny photograph. It showed Ethan standing inside the museum, smiling, wearing the curator's porcelain mask. The tiny photograph trembled between the curator's gloved fingers. Ethan stared at it without blinking. It wasn't edited. It wasn't blurry. Every wrinkle in his coat, every strand of hair, every reflection in his eyes was unmistakably real. Only one detail refused to make sense. He was smiling. Not the relieved smile of a man celebrating victory. Not the polite smile of someone posing for a photograph. It was the calm smile of someone who had accepted something terrible. Behind him, the museum looked exactly as it did now. The same marble floor. The same dim lights. The same endless hallway. Except, the display cases behind him were empty. Every single one. The curator quietly closed the pocket watch. You don't remember. Ethan forced himself to speak. Remember what? The curator looked toward the ceiling as if listening to distant footsteps. The first time you came here. Back at police headquarters, Ethan requested every archived file connected to unexplained disappearances beneath the old district. Nothing. No tunnels. No abandoned museum. No missing maintenance records. It was as if that section of the city had never existed. Lena noticed something strange. Ethan. She pointed toward the computer screen. One investigation kept appearing every time she searched. Case number 731. No title. No description. Only one assigned detective. Ethan Cole. Date opened. 15 years earlier. Date closed. The same day. Status. Memory restricted. Lena frowned. What does that even mean? Ethan had never heard the phrase before. He entered his clearance code. Access denied. He entered the chief's credentials. Access denied. He disconnected the terminal from the network. The file vanished. Not deleted. Vanished. As though it had never existed. Over the next several days, Ethan interviewed witnesses connected to Daniel Brooks. None remembered the same version of events. One neighbor insisted Daniel had lived alone for years. Another swore his wife had answered the door the previous afternoon. A mail carrier claimed Daniel had moved away months ago. A student insisted Mr. Brooks had cancelled class because he was already dead. Every memory contradicted another. Every witness sounded completely certain. Reality itself had become unreliable. Lena whispered during the drive back to headquarters. It feels like everyone remembers a different world. Ethan didn't answer. Because he had begun noticing the same thing inside himself. He could clearly remember attending his wife's funeral. Then suddenly, he remembered never being married. Both memories felt equally real. Sleep became impossible. Every night Ethan woke at exactly 3:13 a.m. His apartment clock always stopped. His digital watch always reset. His phone recorded no activity. Yet every morning, exactly 1 hour had disappeared. One evening he decided to stay awake. He locked every door. Covered every window. Placed a video camera on the kitchen table. At 3:12, everything was normal. At 3:13, the screen filled with static. When the image returned, it was 4:14. The camera had recorded nothing except 61 minutes of silence. Except, Ethan wasn't sitting where he had been. He was standing, facing his apartment wall. As though someone had positioned him there. Written across the wall, in his own handwriting, were 7 words. Stop looking for the first exhibit. He had no memory of writing them. The sentence haunted him. The first exhibit. Not exhibit 347. Not 348. The first. If every exhibit had a beginning, then the museum itself had one. Ethan returned beneath the city. The curator was waiting. I'd like to see Exhibit 1. For the first time. The curator hesitated. Visitors usually ask for the final exhibit. I'm asking for the first. The curator sighed. As you wish. He produced an enormous brass key from inside his coat. Together they walked through hallways Ethan had never noticed before. The air grew colder. Paintings disappeared. Music faded. Dust returned. At the end of a forgotten corridor stood a heavy wooden door. Above it, only one Roman numeral. The curator unlocked it. You may enter alone. There were no display cases. No plaques. No ropes. No museum lighting. Only an empty room. In the center sat a small wooden chair. A little boy was drawing with black crayons. He couldn't have been older than 8. The child never looked up. Instead, he quietly continued drawing page after page. Each drawing showed impossible murders. Buildings burning. Families disappearing. People standing beside their own bodies. The final drawing made Ethan's blood run cold. It showed the museum itself. Except it wasn't underground. It was being built. Workers carried bricks. Architects studied blueprints. And standing beside them, watching construction, was the little boy. Ethan slowly approached. What are you drawing? The child answered without lifting his head. Memories. These aren't memories. They will be. Ethan looked around the room. There aren't any windows. There don't need to be. How long have you been here? The boy finally stopped drawing. Then quietly asked. What year is it? Ethan answered. The child frowned. That can't be right. Why? Because they promised I'd only be alone for one afternoon. His voice cracked. I've been waiting. For almost 200 years. Ethan stumbled backward. Nothing about the child appeared supernatural. No glowing eyes. No monstrous smile. No demonic voice. Just a frightened boy. Frozen in time. Still waiting for adults who never returned. The child handed Ethan one final drawing. It showed a man wearing a porcelain mask, standing beside a younger detective. The detective's face was unmistakable. It was Ethan. Not as he looked today, but 15 years younger. The date written beneath the drawing read, Case 731. The same case file that officially didn't exist. Before Ethan could ask another question, the lights inside the room went out. The child's voice echoed through the darkness. Soft. Almost apologetic. You weren't supposed to come back. Darkness consumed the room. For several seconds, Ethan heard nothing except his own breathing. Then the lights returned. The wooden chair was empty. The crayons were gone. Every drawing had vanished. Only a single manila folder rested on the floor. Across its cover were the words, Case 731. The file he had searched for. The file that officially did not exist. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were only 3 documents. The first was a police report. Detective Ethan Cole. Date, 15 years earlier. Subject, unauthorized entry into restricted structure. Outcome, memory preservation authorized. The second document was stranger. It was a consent form. Signed. By Ethan himself. At the bottom of the page, in his unmistakable handwriting, were 7 chilling words. Let me forget, or I'll destroy everything. His heart pounded. He had signed this. But he had no memory of it. The third document contained a single photograph. It showed a much younger Ethan standing beside the curator. Neither looked frightened. Both looked exhausted. Behind them stood the little boy. Still drawing. Still waiting. The curator appeared quietly behind him. You remember now. Ethan closed the folder. No. But you're close. The curator removed one white glove. His hand was covered in deep scars, old burns, and faded ink marks, as though countless names had once been written directly onto his skin. You think this museum predicts crimes? It doesn't. It remembers them. Ethan frowned. They haven't happened yet. The curator nodded. Not from your perspective. He walked toward an enormous circular window overlooking hundreds of galleries stretching into darkness. Time isn't a straight line here. It folds. Every crime. Every choice. Every regret. Exists at once. The museum wasn't creating murders. It wasn't causing them. It wasn't celebrating them. It was preserving every possible tragedy before reality settled on one version. Every midnight. Every possibility collapsed into a single outcome. The museum merely recorded the final version first. The boy. Ethan whispered. Who is he? The curator stared into the distance. The first witness. 2 centuries ago, an architect discovered this place while digging beneath the city. He brought his young son. The adults panicked. They tried to destroy the museum. But they couldn't. The museum defended itself. Not with violence. With memory. Everyone who entered gradually forgot why they had come. Friends forgot each other. Families remembered different lives. Eventually, everyone left. Except the little boy. The museum preserved him exactly as he was. Forever waiting. Forever drawing. Because children remembered things adults chose to forget. He became the museum's first recorder, the curator said quietly. The first curator? No. The first prisoner. The curator handed Ethan another photograph. It showed Ethan from 15 years ago. Young. Determined. Terrified. He had discovered the museum during an investigation into several impossible deaths. Back then, he had demanded the truth. The museum gave it to him. For 3 days he witnessed every possible future. Every murder prevented. Every murder committed. Every life saved. Every life lost. The human mind wasn't meant to hold infinite possibilities. By the 3rd day, he had begged to forget. The museum accepted. But it made him sign one condition. When you remember again, you must decide our future. The curator led Ethan into one last gallery. There was no plaque. No exhibit number. Only one display. Inside stood the museum itself. Burning. Paintings collapsing. Glass exploding. Every hallway consumed by fire. At the center, the little boy smiled for the first time. Outside the flames, the curator lay motionless. His porcelain mask cracked in half. And standing before the fire, holding a lantern, was Ethan. This future hasn't happened, the curator said. But it can. If the museum burns, the memories burn with it. Every tragedy. Every warning. Every possibility. The world will forget. And without memory, humanity repeats everything. Ethan looked at the burning display. Then back at the endless galleries. Thousands. No. Millions of lives. Every terrible choice. Every irreversible mistake. Preserved forever. Was the museum protecting humanity? Or imprisoning it inside its worst moments? Silence stretched across the hall. The curator removed his porcelain mask. Beneath it, there was no monster. No ancient demon. Only an exhausted old man with tired eyes. I've carried these memories for 112 years. I'm tired. The museum doesn't choose its keeper. It waits. For someone willing to remember. He held out the mask. Ethan stared at it. If he accepted, he would become the next curator. He would remember every tragedy. Forever. If he refused, the museum would simply wait for another visitor. And the cycle would continue. Ethan thought of Daniel Brooks. His wife. The missing people. The frightened little boy still drawing impossible futures. Then, he looked at the lantern displayed beside the final exhibit. Without another word, he picked it up. The curator smiled. Not with relief. With understanding. Ethan walked to the first gallery. Then the second. Then the third. One by one, he placed the lantern beneath the ancient wooden displays. Flames spread slowly. Paintings curled. Glass shattered. The museum did not scream. It sighed. As though it had been waiting centuries to rest. The little boy watched quietly. As the fire reached his room, time finally caught him. His hair turned gray. His face aged. His small body became that of an old man within seconds. He looked toward Ethan. And smiled. Thank you. Before disappearing into ash. The curator closed his eyes. His body dissolved into drifting dust. The porcelain mask fell to the floor. Then cracked apart. Weeks later, the abandoned tunnels beneath the city were sealed during construction. Workers found nothing unusual. No museum. No paintings. No galleries. Only empty stone corridors. Detective Ethan Cole resigned from the police force the following month. He never spoke publicly about Case 731. He never wrote a report. He never tried to explain what had happened. Some truths, he realized, survived only because they were impossible to prove. Years later, a new museum opened across the city. It specialized in local history. Visitors praised its beautiful architecture, its quiet atmosphere, its strange feeling of familiarity. Near the entrance hung a single painting. No title. No artist. Just the portrait of an elderly museum curator with kind, tired eyes. Most visitors walked past without noticing. One little girl stopped. She stared at the painting for several seconds. Then asked her mother, "Why is that man looking at me like he knows my name?" Her mother smiled. "I'm sure he doesn't." They continued walking. Behind them, the painted curator's eyes remained fixed on the hallway. Watching. Waiting. Remembering. Fade to black. The end.